Good day, everyone. Welcome to our Sunday reflection for the 31st Sunday of the year B. The theme of our reflection is the key to true love. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. A young married woman with two beautiful children often questioned her husband's love for her. Standing at the sink one day, she thought, there must be more to life than this. When her husband returned home and found a note she had left behind, he broke down in tears. She would call him weekly to check on the children, and he will express his deep love for her and plead for her to return home. Each time she would decline and hang up. Eventually, he decided to hire a private investigator to locate her. The husband arrived at the apartment where she was staying, nervously holding a bouquet of flowers. After rehearsing what he would say countless times, he finally mustered the courage to knock. When she opened the door, he began to speak, but she suddenly burst into tears and fell into his arms. Through her tears, she said, "Let's go home." Months later, as their relationship began to heal, he asked her about something troubling him. "During all those phone calls, I asked you to return, yet you always refused. Why did you choose to come back?" She replied, "Before you merely told me you loved me. When you came looking for me, you showed me that you loved me." Our readings invite us to make love tangible. In our first reading, Moses urged the people to uphold God's commandments out of genuine devotion. In the Gospel passage, a scribe inquired about the most important commandment. Jesus responds by instructing him to love God wholeheartedly with all his heart, soul, mind, and strength, just as Moses taught. To clarify this teaching further, he adds the importance of loving one's neighbor as oneself. Since we often hear this message from Jesus, its familiarity can diminish its impact. Traditionally, the commandments to love God and neighbor were seen as distinct. However, Jesus unified them, presenting them as two sides of a single coin. We often assume that true love for God naturally leads to loving our neighbor, but that assumption is misleading. Thus, Jesus' teaching carries more profound implications. You cannot love God without loving your neighbor. Interestingly, we may gloss over or take for granted the phrase, "You shall love your neighbor as yourself." As a result, we need to pause and hear it again. What kind of self is Jesus referring to here? He's referring to the true self and not to the false self. Our false self is the one we cultivate because we hate ourselves. To live from my false self is to live an utterly selfish life. And because it is not real, this choice leads to a profound feeling of emptiness. I cannot love a self that does not exist. Because of that, I cannot love God or my neighbor from such a place. Keeping the commandment is possible only through finding my true self, with all my strength and weaknesses, without any masks. Then, I can give myself to God and my neighbor. Thomas Merton shows us the difficulty of this process. He states, "Every one of us is shadowed by an illusory person, a false self. This is the man I want myself to be, but who cannot exist, because God does not know anything about him." We are not good at recognizing illusions, least of all, the ones we cherish about ourselves. The ones we are born with, and which fits the root of sin. For most people in the world, there is no greater subjective reality than this false self of theirs, which cannot exist. A life devoted to the cult of this shadow is what is called a life of sin. This is taken from the New Seeds of Contemplation, page 34. Authentic love is dying to the false self with its selfishness and self-absorption, and rising to life in profound communion in a deep and self-giving relationship with God and others. St. Paul experienced this reality when he said, "It is no longer I who live, but Christ lives in me." Galatians chapter 2, verse 20. If we do not undergo the same transformation, our love remains an empty profession, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing, to borrow from Shakespeare. This week, I invite you to go against your natural tendency to be selfish. Choose 2 days and wake up 15 minutes earlier to pray the rosary. Secondly, reach out to someone you have always desired to be charitable to. Schedule the act of charity and do it. Have a blessed week.